Good evening. It is 7 o'clock on Thursday, June 11th, 2020. This is a meeting of the Bellbrook-Sugarcreek Board of Education in public for the purpose of conducting the school district's business. It's not a public community meeting. There is time for public participation during the meeting, but we have not had anyone sign up this evening to speak. So, Mr. Liming, would you please call the roll?
Yes. Mr. Carpenter?
Here.
Mrs. France?
Here.
Mrs. Long?
Here.
Mr. Price? Mr. Price?
Kevin, you're on mute.
Oh, he's muted.
Middle, bottom, middle.
There we go. Got it.
Hey,
Okay.
I'm here.
Yeah. And Mrs. Sloughman?
Here.
all right, please stand as you're able to join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Gentlemen, please remove your hats. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I think we're going to still have to work on our unison for that. Okay, it's time. Number 3 is reports to the board. So first item, district finances. We'll go to Dr. Kozad and Mr. Liming.
Yep. Before we get to district finance and remote learning, I want to read a statement that we sent out today from myself and from the Board of Education. So I'll just go ahead and read that. That information is social media and also on our website. And like I said, I emailed this out early this morning. So over the past few weeks, we have protests call for equality after the tragic and unjust killing of George Floyd. Numerous people of all ages and backgrounds have been engaged in nonviolent, peaceful protests to speak out against racism and injustice, including peaceful events held here in Bellbrook and Sugarcreek Township. We know that our students enter our schools carrying an assortment of beliefs regarding race, culture, religion, and lifestyle. We make it a priority to support all of our students to ensure that everyone is treated with respect and dignity. We are committed to promoting a positive culture that respects differences, tolerance, and inclusion of all people. Bellbrook-Sugarcreek Schools supports the stance against racial injustice and is committed to promoting equity, equality, respect, and inclusive practices. During our remote learning time at the end of the year, staff, students, and the community were invited to participate in the reading of a book called Wish Tree that examined our differences among people and the importance of accepting others. Next year, we will be providing training around diversity, equity, cultural competency, and inclusive practice to our staff and students. Additionally, we'll be forming a committee that examines and addresses these complex societal issues. As a society listening and learning from each other, we will continue to move forward for the betterment of all. And as always, if you have any questions or concerns, please don't hesitate to email me at superintendent@bss.k12.oh.us. Sincerely, myself, Superintendent, and Bellbrook-Sugarcreek Local Schools Board of Education.
Thank you very much.
Okay, moving on to district finances. We held a special board meeting earlier in this week to talk about our district financial situation and discussion about levy. We also had a conversation about all day, every day kindergarten. Before we get on the district finances, is there any other questions or thoughts about all day, every day kindergarten? We ended up at the place of 4 all day, every day kindergarten spots or positions in classrooms, and 1 purple gold, which is our halftime position. And that's where we're at due to our enrollment. Obviously, if there's a large surge of enrollment on our purple and gold, we'll take a look at that when that becomes necessary. So is there, before we get on to the levy piece and so forth, is there any other questions or thoughts about all day, every day kindergarten?
At the time, there were about 13 or 14 open slots on the all day, every day. Do we know if there's been more enrollment since then?
Not to my knowledge, there has not been. I have not been notified that there has been more students for all day, every day kindergarten.
Okay.
Yeah. And yep. So 13 spots or so for all day.
Okay.
Yep. Okay. All right.
Very good.
Very good. We'll move on to the next topic under district finances. So, like I said earlier, we on Monday talking about the levy was the other piece of the levy or the Monday conversation.
Yes.
And so tonight we're continuing to gather feedback, and hopefully we can, get to the ballpark of being on the same page with going forward of kind of what we're looking at. And so the questions that we were looking at that we need to be able to answer for a levy is, we answered the question that we are going for a levy in November. That's what we answered last time. What kind of levy? Is this going to be a real estate tax or an income tax? And I think and again, I don't want to speak for the board, but I think we're heavily leaning towards the real estate tax at this time. And the income tax was not really part of the conversation from the other day. And then the next, duration of the levy. And then what kind of levy? So what kind of levy, whether it's new, emergency, and like I said, we've decided, are we leaning heavily towards not doing an income tax? And then the duration of the levy from 1 to 5 years or a continuing levy. So, Kevin, do you want to kind of set the table from the 5-year forecast piece, and then we'll continue some other information. Again, some people might not have been on the meeting at Monday, so that's why we're kind of just reviewing things and making sure that everybody's informed of what the information out there is.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. First of all, I'd just like to say, in case there's someone out there that hasn't been through a lot of this before, that the reason for the financial situation that we're in is multiple. There are several reasons. The main one, in my mind, is that we have very low state funding, forcing us, after a period of time, to come back and ask for more property tax money because of low state funding. On top of that, we just received $659,000 of state cuts that we weren't expecting last month and this month, a total of that amount over these last 2 months. And some of our colleagues are telling me to expect a 10% cut for next year. That would be another $600,000. So we would be looking at 1.2 million total if that happens in state cuts. And then the levy failures themselves have set us back. Some things like that are the reasoning for this. I just wanted to state again that in the 5-year forecast that is on the school website, it has that $659,000 in state cuts built into it, and has another $600,000 for fiscal year 21, which is next year. We've also built into the forecast, I believe it is 2.4 million or 2.5 million, because I keep stating both figures for the phase 4 reductions, somewhere in that vicinity,
Right.
over the 2-year period, fiscal year 21 and 22. So about 1.2 something million each year there. That's built in. And of course, no levy because the levy failed. So I constructed a forecast. We even did a second one just for planning purposes that would add another year out to the end beyond what's required by the state, just for managerial purposes. So what we have in approximately 2 years, June 30th, 2022, which would be the end of fiscal year 22, only about $414,000 in our general fund balance. As Mr. Price stated at the last meeting, the district our size should have about a $3 million minimum general fund carryover. That's $414,000 in fiscal year 22. And it just keeps getting worse as we go on out with no funding anticipated much. And that would be a 2.7 million deficit, that would be in 2023, a $7.1 million deficit at the end of fiscal year 24, and a $12.7 million deficit at the end of fiscal year 25. That is if there is no additional revenue or no additional cuts made, that's where we would be with things exactly as they are now.
Kevin, I think the thing that's important too is to keep reminding people, the nature of how school funding is. That essentially, for all practical purposes, our school revenue is fixed. There's a little twist to that in the sense that appraisals and new construction influences, what is it, 4.5 mils of our, I forget what we have, around 60 mils of total funding for the school. So only
Right.
about 10 or 12% of our funding is adjusted as a function of new construction and also reappraisals. So
Right.
basically, we're operating off the same amount of money. And so if nothing is done, again, we can thank the state for this, because in 1976, House Bill 920, they passed a law that basically, outside millage levies will keep the same value throughout their duration. So as a result, and I think that's the thing that the community struggles with, that why do schools have to keep coming back for levies? And it's simply a function of inflation continues, the revenue is fixed. What else can you do? And all you can do is come back for additional funding. If the levies auto-corrected based upon increased property values, based upon 1-for-1 for new construction, then it would be a different discussion. But because of House Bill 920, State of Ohio law from 1976, that value is essentially fixed on what I don't know is 88% of our funding from property taxes are fixed in value. It's very, very, very important that the community understands that, and that is the fundamental reason why. It was enlightening to me as I really began to study this about a year or so ago, and all of a sudden the light came on. It's like, oh, okay, this is why schools have to keep coming back for levies. If we can somehow eliminate inflation, it's all good. Anybody know the magic trick for that one? Let's have a nice little talk. But inflation is reality, and you cannot buy the same amount of stuff with the same amount of money when things go up in cost. And so, yes, as things go up in cost, operating expenses of the district, to include, yes, we have to increase teacher salaries because they live in a world where inflation exists. They can't continue to work for the same amount of money that they did, in years past. So these are natural increases driven by the reality of a thing called inflation, fundamental to any understanding of economics. And so, yeah, it's just very important. I think people, and I'll keep saying that every time we have discussions like this, because it's not simple to understand. It's critically important to understand.
I agree.
There you go.
And the state has a very complex funding formula. As we said many times, we get about 27% of our funding from the state. I worked for 2 other districts before I came here 18 years ago, and they were both getting about 60% of their funding from the state. It's a complex formula, but the big pieces of it are what's the property valuation in your district? What are the homes worth? Do you have any commercial and that kind of thing? And then what's the average income of your residents? We both hit on the end of that where the state determines we have a high ability to pay locally, therefore they cut our state funding. And that's why we have to rely heavily on local funding, such as the property tax. We have no income tax. That's another big factor. So.
Right. Yeah, when the state was going through the recent reductions for the $659,000 that was taken back, they identified Bellbrook-Sugarcreek in the top quintile or top fifth based on income and property values. But not only that, when you look at the income tax returns compared to other districts in the state, we are, depending on whether you're looking at adjusted income or gross income, you're either number 32 or number 33 out of 611 districts, which puts us really, really close to the top 5%, between I think 5 and 6%. So they don't look very, very favorably on us for financial concerns. They feel like we are quite capable of taking care of that ourselves.
And the way they look at that, and this was in the performance audit that the auditor of state did for us at no cost to the district because of our financial situation, looked at the local tax effort. And so that's how they base on how much funding we get, and for these reductions, how they determined that we were in that higher category. And compared to the local our local schools around us, our local tax effort is much lower compared to our other communities, compared to
Right.
our ability to pay. So what is our taxes for real estate and income tax for schools? And then what is the community's ability to pay? And so our local tax effort is much lower, meaning comparatively speaking, our citizens are paying lower taxes compared to the ability to pay with other communities. So that's part of how the state, the formulas of how much pay or how much money we get from the state and what our reductions are, which are so much higher. So.
Right. And I think just to be clear, I don't believe there's anybody here among the 7 of us that feel this is a fair way to fund school districts. But if what we're stuck with, and you have to operate as best you can within the parameters that are set forth and try to, while also trying to get them changed on the state level and working like that. But
yeah, and I think the reductions that were just made are just a prime example of why you can't rely on the state to
Exactly.
fund our school district, because they're not, when situation gets tough now, they're just going to come back to the local communities, local school districts, and just they did not do a proactive cut or a prorated cut. They did a cut based on our entire funding for our entire year, 11% cut. So
Right.
that's even more unfair. So other pieces that have to go with this, the 5-year forecast is there. And again, our balance at the end of FY22 is $414,000 forecasted. Obviously, it was much higher when, it was in the $1.2, $1.3, $1.4 million range before these state cuts. So that just put us in a bigger hole there to dig out. The other piece that we need to take in consideration for our millage amount, or the dollar amount that we're looking for, either way you're looking at it, is we did make $2.5 million in reductions. Again, this was submitted to the state because we were in fiscal precaution, so we had to do that. And we're in the process of implementing those reductions for next year and the school year after. And those, at this point, based, what's in the 5-year forecast, those cuts are carried out and are not in the 5-year forecast. They're adjusted to stay in there. So, another piece of this is if we do go for a levy or whatever levy we go for in the fall, if we want to bring any of those things back from our phase 4 reductions that we cut, we then have to take that into account going
Right.
forward, and just making sure that we have that mindset of how much money, how much, what do we want to bring back this year, and what is reasonable to bring back, and then going forward, what's reasonable to bring back. Because again,
Right.
we need to look at the short-term situation, but we also need to look at our long-term financial stability within the school district, and the future for levies in the future. That we want to make sure that we are looking short-term with our financial situation, but also looking long-term in that respect. So those are Kevin, Kevin Lime, do you have anything else to add? I mean, those are the pieces, just to, again, give a well-rounded kind of background and information. And I know we gave pretty much the same information earlier in the week on Monday, but it doesn't hurt to continue to go over these things, because school finance can be a little complicated.
the only thing I would say is that, in my opinion, I think Doug's on the same boat there, that tonight, this discussion, I would like to have enough input. We're not taking a vote again, but enough input that we could prepare a resolution for the June 30th meeting for the board to pass. In other words, one that sounds like we could be, most of us or all of us could be on board with, without actually voting, because I need to take that information to the bonding attorney to prepare all that. I'd rather not have him do 3 or 4 different scenarios and bring them in, because that would cost more money and take a lot more time for him to prepare. He said he can meet the deadline for us. So that was kind of the goal tonight. I'd like to know if we can get to what you would like to see us do, basically, in the way of a levy. And then the other thing to keep in mind, whether we do, whatever we do, there might be a millage threshold you don't want to go above. You think we'd be asking too much. That would be nice to know that too, so that we don't come back with something that's
Mhm.
too high, I guess, or too low either.
Right. Now, one of the things that I guess misconceptions I had about a temporary or limited levy is that I thought we had the option to go from 1 to 10 years on them, but I've learned since Mr. Liming has kind of brought me up to speed on that it's really 1 to 5, and that's true for an emergency levy or for a new levy, new money. So that implies that you have to have something in mind for what you're going to do when you get to the end of that time period. Is it a renewal? Is it going to be for the same amount? Is it, is the perception from the community going to be, well, we just agreed to extending that one levy. Why might we need more? But in 5 years, we would need more because of inflation, like Kevin Price is talking about. So that's one concern I have. But and the other is that emergency money doesn't grow over the 4 or 5 years that you've got it. It may be good communication, but we don't get any increase on the for new construction and that kind of stuff. It's a flat. When you're talking about a flat dollar amount, it really is a flat dollar amount the whole time. There isn't any wiggle room on getting new funds. That said, though, I mean, there's still viable options, but those are a couple of concerns I have with those. But they also the perception of if it's permanent, there's a segment of the population that just objects to permanent levies on principle, and so if there had been 154 of those people, we wouldn't have been having that conversation. So it's a little bit of a how do we reach the community with a proposal that they are comfortable with.
David, it's for those reasons why I was advocating, in our discussion on Monday for an emergency levy. For two reasons. One, it conveys the dire, near catastrophic situation the schools are faced with right now.
Right.
If we return to the vote or to the ballot with what we just saw fail twice, I think it'll pass, but I'm not real certain of that, and we don't know what's going to happen with COVID over the next few months.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we're rolling the dice here a lot more unfavorably if we go with what we just saw fail twice.
No, I don't disagree.
Yeah. There was a lot of comments from the community about, again, there are people that are fundamentally opposed to levies anyhow, but there's also a segment of that are opposed just because of the nature of them being permanent.
Right.
So while we could have a normal levy that is of a limited period, 5 years, and the only advantage of that is that it allows it to grow a little bit. I think we've figured out just, back of the hand, figures the other day, I don't know, $20,000 a year maybe benefit we would get from, a continuing levy over an emergency levy over the next 5 years. I may have that number wrong, but that seems what sticks in my head from the other night. So I think we get virtually no substantive financial benefit for a continuing levy. For a limited levy that's just conventional levy over an emergency levy, and we lose the messaging that an emergency levy would convey. When you see a sign that says emergency levy, it's going to get people's attention. And there's going to be already been enough publicity, already enough realization of the impacts of this levy, especially when school starts.
Mhm.
You know, that sports team is gone. You know, that bus is not coming to the door anymore. You know, that STEM program is gone. It's going to be kind of almost like a bucket of water for people. And I think we kind of saw that with some of the correspondence that came from the community, that they really weren't fully appreciating what the impacts were going to be, even though they were told. But a lot of times it's hard for them to process that. You know, we live in a busy world trying to, you know, manage a lot of different things in our lives. And sometimes people don't have the time to dedicate to understand what the impacts are going to be. But I think slowly but surely by the time school starts, it's going to be really clear that this is severe, what's occurred. And then when you combine that with the message that we have an emergency levy, they're like, oh, you know, okay, yeah, there is an emergency. I'm realizing that now. And then when we combine that with the message that this provides an opportunity for restoration of a substantial number of those things that were cut. What
Right.
was specific, it will take some time to figure that out. But for all practical purposes, the money, you know, assuming, let's say we get the same amount of money passed, at least that much, then it's equitable. It would be arriving at the same time, whether it would have passed in April or whether it would have passed in November, because it comes with the new school year.
True.
So essentially,
Yeah.
we have an opportunity for recovery, substantial recovery. There'll be some teachers that we will have lost because they can't start the year not knowing what we can't start them in the year not knowing what's going to happen with the November ballot issue. So those things are, you know, permanent, at least as we see them starting in November. But some of the other things, such as busing, clubs, sports, STEM, those kind of things can be seriously relooked at. So I will be really firm in my opinion that it needs to be an emergency levy. I think we should discuss what that amount should be. It has to be at least 3.3 because that's what we asked for before, and it's not like we discovered all of a sudden we had some extra money that wasn't there.
Right.
So we, you know, so it needs to be at least 3.3. But then we've been hit with, you know, 650K of cuts from the state. So you can certainly make a logical and accurate argument for 3.95 million. But anyway, those are my thoughts. I'll let the rest of you talk now. But I think, you know, I said it Monday. I said it again here. So I think if you have questions, I'll answer. Otherwise, I'll just let you all talk and go on mute for the moment.
In researching emergency levies versus the continuing levy, I was fortunate to have a lot of information and be able to have somebody help me with some numbers and talk to some other board members of other districts. And my recommendation is for the continuing levy. I feel like that is really going to help us, give us, to move us along in the direction that we want to go. And it'll set us up in the future to keep moving and not having to readdress this in 5 years.
I agree with Karen. I think we need to, I understand your point for calling it an emergency levy. But if it's only for 5 years, in 5 years, we have to come back and ask for this money. Plus, we'll probably need more money because of inflation. And that just makes it that much harder to pass a levy plus two levies. You know, people will always vote for the smaller one. So I think we need to really look at that because nobody likes to do these levy campaigns. And you get to a point where you just don't feel like begging for money every 5 years. And that's why we tried to get all the old levies over to continuing ones so that we wouldn't have to come back. And for the amounts, I think we have to go for what we asked for before, plus whatever the state is cutting us, because we can't keep making cuts every year. We have to let our programs do what they're supposed to do for the kids. And then we have to be able to put the funds into the programs. So that's my opinion.
Virginia, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I'm thinking from a business standpoint, you can't afford to take a loss all the time. And I just don't think the community would respect us if we were setting ourselves up to take a loss. Mary's right. We need to include the cut from the state.
I think when we were looking at the cut from the state, it's for this year and next year, although it's hard to project whether or not they would do anything beyond that. But as the 5-year forecast assumes that we'd go back to our funding from before. So that would be essentially 1.2, and depending upon whether there's any relenting that on it, 1.2 over 5 years kind of becomes what, 0.25 or 250,000. So that gets us closer to what, 3.5 to 3.55. And I'm not sure what the millage translates to under that, but what we were asking, what, 5.7 before for 3.3, and I don't know whether there's any adjustment that the auditor has in their, revenue that's generated per mill, but somewhere in 5 sounds better than somewhere in 6 as far as mills are concerned.
Yeah, that's
just,
I don't know where those numbers fall.
I think that's a reasonable gamble that we're just going to encumber a state, cut for 2 years versus, permanently. So I can see your point about, rather than assuming we're going to have a $650,000 cut, for the next 5 years, let's assume we have that for 2 years. We divide that by 5, that works out to whatever, $250,000 per year. So you add that to the 3.3, then it gives you notionally a $3.55 million levy. So I personally don't have an issue with that. You can argue it both ways. But conservatively, in consideration of the public, we only know what we know right now. We know we have a cut this year. We have strong indications of a cut next year. I think it would be reasonable to say, okay, let's go, with a 3.55, 3.6, somewhere in there. So I think, we should come to some consensus on that. But I think there's really 2 things we have to determine here, right? What comes to the decision? Are we going to go continuing levy? Or are we going to do an emergency levy? And I think that's question 1. Question 2 is then for how much, regardless of which way you go with it. So I think we need to circle back and come to a position on that as a board, whether it's going to be emergency or continuing. And Karen and Mary, I appreciate your comments on that. I just don't want to sit here on November 9th or whatever it's going to be and say the levy failed, And I think we're absolutely going to lose votes if we don't use the word emergency. You're going to get as I look at it, get or lose. But I don't want to on November 9th say, well, we lost again by 100 votes, or whatever it's going to be. I think we were losing a tremendous opportunity. If we go with an emergency levy, it kind of, in one sense, lights the fire, on us, on our community, to explore alternatives, to continually funding our schools based on property taxes. I think, in fairness, we are reaching the saturation point of that for our community. And so there are opportunities to look at other things. We don't really want to be on that rabbit hole right now to any great degree, but yes,
Right.
migrating things from property to income would actually benefit our elderly population in particular, because they would actually see their overall tax burden go down. So it'd be hard to find them in opposition to a position that's going to see their tax burden decrease if we were able to successfully communicate to the community and show that, no, we're not, during this 5-year period, raising taxes. We're actually moving taxes in a way that would help those that are, least able to pay. So I think, a limited period levy would, in a sense, light a fire on us, on the community, to look at alternatives rather than doing the same old thing and expecting, the same results when we've twice now seen that hasn't been successful. So again, I'm pretty passionate about this. I sincerely believe it needs to be emergency. And the amount we can debate, but I think it fundamentally needs to be an emergency, or I fear what the outcome is going to be come November.
Just one thing I wanted to clarify too, when David and Kevin are talking about 3.55, they're talking about a levy that would raise $3.55 million, not talking 3.55 mils of taxes. That's
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Correct.
Mills and million are just too close in the terminology world to. Now, do we know how something is presented on the ballot?
Yes.
If it's an emergency, is it presented with the dollar amount? Is it presented in millage? I know the. Well, I guess I'd like clarification.
Doug, you might want to answer that when you've.
Sure, yeah, it's our understanding that if it's an emergency levy, the dollar amount's going to be on there, but it also later is going to have the millage amount on there.
Okay.
And likewise, on the other way, it has, if it's just a regular levy or new levy, it does state the millage on there, but it also states the dollar amount.
Okay, so they're both there regardless.
Right, and both of them are actually dollar amounts when you think about it. It has the millage on there for information, but even on a regular levy, that millage is reduced over the years to yield the same amount for most of the millage.
Right.
And under an emergency levy, you just go with a flat dollar amount, and that never changes. And they just put, if it was 5 point something mils, that would be on there for informational purposes, is what it seemed like I determined there. So
Okay.
it does go on the ballot. Therefore, that's one thing I was thinking, if sometimes in discussion, we would have a threshold, like someone might say, I don't want to see X number of mills on the ballot. I just feel like that would look too high or is too high or something. I would like to, if I get some clarification on that, I could talk to the county auditor and don't know for sure if he would tell me that, but I might say, we want to stay under this millage. What's the highest dollar amount we could get at the end of that mill? Something like that. A lot of discussions I can have with the county auditor on.
Sure.
Yeah, so the other piece with the dollar amount, we'll just stay with that for a second here, is depending on what we bring back, if we bring back anything and when we bring it back, whether it's this year or next year. So that also, can be calculated in. If we did about 1.2, 1.3, somewhere in that range of cuts this year, and those same cuts then are followed up with next year. So that's why it's a cumulative, about $2.3, $2.5 million. So, if there's something such as personnel that is really difficult to bring back a challenge to bring back a teaching position where schedules are set and so forth in the middle of the year.
Right.
That could be really challenging. So, that there is some savings in there for this 1 year, if you call it a savings, that could impact the amount that we're asking for also. That would maybe lower that a little bit, but could be put into that whole realm of decision making. So there's multiple factors that are kind of in play, back and forth, positive and negative. When I say positive and negative, I mean, in the black or in the red, on all those decisions. So there's multiple pieces in on that.
Some of the things that, one item that comes to mind is, but just to the way I think might be easiest to bring back, or easy as compared to other things, is the supplemental positions, which would also bring back clubs and things like that for at least the second semester of the year if it would pass. That would be
Nice.
that would be a great addition to be able to address those without, I think, but I think having a good idea of what could come back with a certain dollar threshold, or have some idea of what are the easiest to bring back versus some of the most difficult to bring back, would be good for us to know sometime in the very near future.
Because
I
we couldn't, of course, bring back, a teacher in November if the levy passed,
Right.
But it doesn't mean you couldn't in the following year, correct? Because then you
That's
got the same
correct.
amount of money that you would have had either way, starting in September 2021, that you would have had whether the levy passed here in April or passed in November. So there could be some recoupment of some of those areas that we've seen lost,
Right.
with respect to teachers. Maybe, I don't know about librarians, if those could be brought back. I would assume those could be brought back, so we could get away from the half-day librarian situation we're faced with right now. I think those could be brought back promptly, right? If we had a levy passage in November, I believe.
The
I think
dilemma
we really need to be able to offer a list of things that we want to look at to bring back if the levy passes. I think that will help people a lot, and it will make it seem like we really are serious about this, because we want to bring things back too.
Right.
That's a
And
great
the-
idea.
The reverse is also true, though, that people will say they want to know what's going to be cut if this levy fails. We had a lot of those
True.
from last
Well,
year.
we told them that last time, and
Right.
It didn't seem to affect them too much until the cuts really hit. That if we can tell them what we plan to bring back, I think that would help.
It is more of a positive message. In some instances, like the librarian, we've lost the librarian that we had, so we can't bring her back. She's gone on to a new position, which is a terrible shame, really. Which is great.
Very unfortunate.
We could still try to bring her back.
Yeah, we could try to woo her back.
Maybe some cookies, like we could do something.
I think people don't realize that these teachers and librarians are professional people, and they're highly educated. A lot of them have advanced degrees, and they've put a lot into their education, and they can't just sit around waiting for us to pass the levy. And I hear out there that we should cut their salaries when they're not making that much to begin with for a person with advanced degrees. So I think we really need to be sensitive to the fact that we can't afford to lose these people. They can't just bring them back. They're not sitting in their kitchens waiting for us. So I think we need to really think about what we're doing here to people's lives.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, at some point, in the very near future here of what to bring back and the timeline on that. And then also, again, just so that everybody's fully educated out there is, what are the additional consequences and ramifications if something doesn't pass. So, I think that's a little bit more down the road kind of conversation we need to figure out sooner rather than later of, where we're at with this particular levy. But I think the fully educational piece of what are the full consequences, positively and negatively, to the levy passage.
Right.
Or the levy not passing.
Yeah. Well, and even say, if it passes, this is what comes back second half, this is what comes back next year then as well. So
right. Because again, all these reductions we are making, have made the $4.8 million reductions over the past 2 or so years. A piece of that is that we didn't pass a levy in 2019 and missed out on a whole year of collection here.
Right.
That's a whole other piece to why we had to make reductions due to essentially losing. We asked for about the same amount of $3.3 million. We essentially lost $3.3 million in the calendar year of 2020, and so trying to make up that money through reductions. And also having to do it because we were put on fiscal precaution by the Ohio Department of Education. So we had to put in, we had to do those reductions. So,
and not passing this time puts us another 3.3 or 3.5 further into the hole. Another, a dollar amount that we would have to add back in for a future levy.
Right, and kind of a foreshadowing of that is the performance audit that the state did for us. I mentioned earlier that there's a lot of reductions in there, and we've implemented quite a few of those reductions. And actually, they were calling for a 10% reduction in staff. Over the past 2 years, we have done about a 10% reduction in staff. So I know they were asking for an additional 10% just because they couldn't find other areas. Since we were so lean, they couldn't find other areas for us to reduce by unless we're going to change the levels of service. And this is a paraphrase from the audit, but that the only way that we can make our budget work is if we have a change in, without a levy passage, is changing in the level of services within the school district. And unfortunately, that's where we're at. We're changing the level of service in the school district. No STEM, no art, K-5, these other reductions, less English, less social studies at the high school, digital literacy, busing, these supplementals. Those are changes in levels of service that are getting further away from a well-rounded education and closer to that state mandated education. So those unfortunately are becoming the reality, is that performance audit, even though we have implemented quite a bit of those things in there. We unfortunately are continuing to go closer and closer to those. Another piece in this whole thing, I don't want to further muddy the water, but our buses are half our fleet, about half our fleet is over replacement. Again, this is in the audit. We have replacement made. So we didn't purchase buses last year. We're purchasing buses this year. I know we're reducing buses, the routes, but still, that's another piece that we need to address in the near future. Our mechanics do a fantastic job of keeping our buses running efficiently and safely, but they can only do that for so long before we need more school buses. So those are about $100,000 each. So those are other pieces that we really have to figure out also. If I want to further muddy the water, but.
Y'all, while you were talking there, I went off and found Beaver Creek's ballot from May of 2019. They had an emergency measure on the ballot, which passed, by the way. And basically the wording, I'll just read it to you here. Although actually, if I got creative, I might actually be able to project this, right, with this technology. Josh, I don't know if you can help me with that, but
present now.
I can do that.
Bottom right, present now.
Okay, here we go.
It's going to show everything. It's going to choose what you're going to have on your screen.
Okay. No. Technology, huh? Okay, can you see that?
Mm-hmm.
Amazing.
I can see it's there.
Yeah.
That's exactly how the ballot was presented on the Greene County Board of Education website. I just went straight there and just picked it for one of their precincts, and that's what came up.
So they had two. Did either one of the emergency pass? Did the other one pass as well? The renewal?
I am not sure.
Okay.
So I guess they combined two into this one, correct? And
Well, it's two votes, so
Yeah.
they're separate levies.
I'll tell you what, if y'all are satisfied with what you just read there as far as an example, I saw the story on it. I can real quickly come back to you on that here in a couple minutes with the Dayton Daily News report on that. So.
Okay.
Okay, I've got the answer right here. In fact, I'll project again. This is the Dayton Daily News. No.
Oh, they approved a pair of them. Okay.
Yeah, they're both.
So they had a 6.15 mil emergency measure.
what they did, obviously they took a value and then equated it to a millage, right? But then it's fixed
Right.
it for the duration.
Right, right.
Okay, I just wanted to kind of, I know we were banding around the language and what it would say and stuff like that. At least we have
Sure.
an example from the ballot there of what it would look like.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, Kevin, for the bond person, I don't know who the bond.
Yes, bonding attorney, we're calling.
Thank you.
Yeah.
For the bonding attorney, we need to have a target dollar amount up to a certain millage.
Right, that,
Yeah.
we don't have to have it up to a certain millage. I'm just thinking if for instance, there's something magical about, we want to stay under 6 mils, I could see what would our county auditor certify to me for 5.9 mils. You're supposed to formally ask it the other way, stating $1, and he tells us the millage, but
Okay.
we can do it that way too.
I don't think that's really it though, Kevin. I mean, I don't think that's really what we don't really need millage to fund our schools. We need a certain dollar amount, right? We know
Right.
we need the 3.3, whatever it was. Plus, David, if we want to go with a more optimistic approach, that we're going to get money year after next from the state. So
Good.
the 100 and whatever it was, math in public here, but
3.55 million.
$250,000 a year,
Well, I think,
whatever that comes
why-
out to be. So
why don't we let Doug and Kevin figure out what the money amount is that we need, and then they turn that over to the auditor, and he'll tell us how many mills that is. We don't tell him what's going on, so then we can approve something at the next meeting at the end of June.
all I'm saying is I don't think we should say, let's make it 5.9 mils just for the way it sounds.
Right.
I think we need to make it for what we need, the money
Exactly.
for what we need, and not just for, 5.9 because it sounds better than 6.1.
Yeah.
Right.
That's my only point.
Yeah, we can definitely do that. So we can take in consideration, we can maybe base it off of the 5.7 mil levy, the $3.3 million or so from March. And then we can factor in the state cuts, but we can also factor in what we would like to see come back, or base that on the dollar amount of some idea for this school year, what would be reasonable to come for this school year, maybe use that dollar amount as kind of an offsetting piece and see where we end up. And
Okay.
in that range. I don't know if that would be helpful.
Yeah, that would be.
Okay, we can definitely do that.
But going circle back to the perpetual question here, though, when are we going to discuss and decide what type of levy? Is it something
I think we're still got that open.
Do we do it at the next meeting?
No, we probably have to have that for the bonding attorney, don't we, Kevin?
We would have to do that unless we do something where we do another special meeting crunched in with the, you know what I'm saying? If we're not going to do that by tonight to give me an idea for June 30th, then we're doing June 30th to get an idea for another meeting, and then we have to have a second resolution, and then that has to be filed by August 5th. So it really makes it a tight turnaround, and I'm always worried that some of the people I work with on this stuff might be on vacation or something if we get down to a
Sure.
Or sick with COVID-19, right? So
that too, yeah.
Hey,
Uh,
Kevin, can we, and again, because I don't know if we're going to get that particular issue resolved tonight. I don't know if we need to continue to think about it. Can we leave that so-called blank on the resolution, whether it's limited or whether it's continuing?
I think probably it's not the easiest thing to do, but I think it's probably the best thing to do in this situation. It would be for me to take what you guys have said. It sounds like we're pretty much in agreement, basically, on the amount, and have our bonding attorney do 2 different resolutions. One for a 5-year emergency levy that would yield about the $3.5 million range or whatever we come up with there in a discussion, and another one that would be a continuing levy for that would raise about that same amount of money, and then we would have to, if we have both of those prepared and the board looks at them June 30th and says, okay, yeah, everything looks fine except we got to decide which one of those two we want.
Right.
Then at that meeting, we would need to make a decision at the June 30th meeting, in my opinion.
Sure.
I mean, we could conceivably do it later, but it would be really cutting it close to back it up any further.
No, I wouldn't want to
Time.
any later.
That would give people time. You know, if we think we can wait till June 30th, I think that would be prudent. Have them, come up with both options. Then we decide at the next meeting. That way, we're not really putting people on the spot without really trying to have, I guess, the time to ponder it. We discussed it for the first time Monday. I think we're all learning more and more about the nature of levies, and examples of local ones that have passed or not passed or whatnot. So I think it would give us as a board more time to consider. But as long as June 30th, is
we do need. Yeah, we absolutely need to have something for June 30th. I agree.
I've got what I need from this discussion. I don't know if you do, Doug,
Okay.
as far as what we can go forward with. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you all for your input and the lively discussion on it. I mean, the nice thing is, everybody wants to do what's best for the district, and that's, there's no question about that. It's just exactly how do we go about doing it. Okay, is there any other comments on the district finances? All right, then let's go on to remote learning for a review of 2019-20 and a preview of 2021.
Yes, so give me 1 second here. Let me find my notes on that. There they are. So, school year ended on May 21st officially. And so, just to give you again a review of what we did 2019-20 school year at the end there. And I've talked a little bit about this at a previous board meeting last month. So essentially what happened with remote learning is that I think it was March 12th or so, on a Thursday, we were notified that we were essentially not going to be returning to school for, at that point, it was 3 weeks was the verbiage used, an extended spring break. But that really wasn't what it was. It was a remote learning hiatus, and then we later found out that we would continue that for the rest of the year. So luckily our district had made a strong effort of getting Chromebooks in the hands of all of our students previously, and have been using them for quite a long time. And then also a push of Google Classroom, which is a learning management system. Again, not as robust as a Prodigy or Canvas or something like that, but definitely a very sufficient learning management system that is user friendly for all ages, really. So, so we essentially turned that around on the next Tuesday after that, so about I think March 17th or so at PD Day, and then we started remote learning, and then we had a couple weeks of that, and then we had spring break. And then we came back and finished out the school year. But what we did that first couple weeks there, we had certain things due every day, and certain requirements of the time set for each of the classes and so forth. But we got feedback after that first couple of weeks by staff and by parents of, given the situation that there was multiple kids at home, and parents were trying to work and trying to help their kids. It was a little overwhelming for people, and just then dealing with the whole COVID-19 piece at that point of where we were at. If you think back to March 19th, very different than now. So we revamped our learning system. We essentially went to kind of like a college model, is Monday and Tuesday were the same classes. Monday, Thursday were the same class. Tuesday, Friday were the same classes. Wednesday, we had a collaboration day and among not only students and the staff, but staff among themselves, and really tried to hone in on deadlines and when things were assigned to make sure, again, that was part of the feedback. There was too many teachers were assigning, there was no official way or consistent way, I should say, teachers assigning things. So we really pushed that in that new plan of providing some consistency for our parents and really dialing it back a little bit because we realized that parents were dealing with other situations or dealing with trying to work and so forth. So we did survey our parents, students, and families through our panorama survey. Again, very positive feedback, but really it came down to a lot of personal learning styles among students. Some really liked it, others did not like it. I think the biggest thing that people missed were obviously, and I know this is an obvious one, but the personal interaction between student and student and teacher, and staff with staff. It just, even though we're interacting on a virtual piece here, just very different than interacting in a classroom. So that probably was the biggest challenge and the biggest thing that people missed. But we took that information and then looking towards next year, I wish I could say that we have guidance from the state, and from that guidance, we have a solid plan for next year. We do not have guidance from the state of what next year is entailing. We keep on hearing. Last week, I thought they were going to come out with something. This week, I thought they were going to come out with something, and they have not. Governor DeWine has made thoughts and comments, made comments that we want kids back in the classroom in the fall, and really haven't given much detail, but also said we're going to try to give a lot of flexibility to the to the local districts, not to the state, local districts. And I think that's a push from not only the superintendents, kind of like the letter that we sent the Greene County superintendents, but also the state organizations of give some guidelines, some parameters, and let the local districts, communities figure it out from there, because each community is a little different. So we have done a survey of our parents and our staff concerning next year. So we did a survey for how things went this year. We also did a survey this past week, not this week, but last week, of some thoughts for next year. Just because we don't know what's going on for next year, that doesn't mean that we aren't spending hours upon hours planning for things and trying to create different scenarios. I think that's the most frustrating part on our side is we're trying to plan through all these scenarios and we don't even know what the destination is. So, it's like going for a trip and not knowing where you're heading to, where your destination is. But you have to plan for some things. You have to pack, you have to, put gas in your car. You have to do all those things, but you don't know where you're heading. So that's kind of where we're at. And from the survey results, again, about 30 to 40% of our families responded to the survey. And a good percentage of our staff responded to the surveys. So when I say obviously here, people want to come back to school 100% face-to-face. That is the overwhelming recommendation, advice, thought from not only from our parents, but from our staff. They want to get back to school as normal. And then secondly, their choice, they had three choices essentially on the question of come back to school 100% if the state allows us. That's obviously the parameter of that. And then some type of blended learning where you're in school some days and you're not in school some days, and some type of hybrid, and then 100% remote. Those are kind of the choices. And for both for parents and staff, it was 100% face-to-face was their first choice, remote was their second choice, and then, blended was their second choice, and then remote was their third choice. So very consistent. Also, face coverings were in the conversation or were a question. And for both, it was people want those to be in specific situations and not all the time. Again, we have to look at what the health guidelines and so forth to see what we can do. But that, it's good to have that information of where people are at. There were some questions about there of if we do come back remote learning or blended learning or even 100% face-to-face, are there going to be some students that aren't going to be able to come back for a medical reason or a valid medical reason or concern? And so we did have some students and staff with that, not as much students as I thought, but again, we only got back 30 to 40% of our survey. So there's 50 to 60% of our families that did not respond to it. So there's probably going to be higher, obviously, numbers to those. But there's, right now it's in the 20s or 30 number of kids that have on the survey, they said a medical reason is going to preclude them from coming back. So we then have to decide how are we going to deal with those students. Are we going to do a hybrid piece where they're with a teacher, or more of a curriculum that is someone's more facilitating and it's already created and working through that. So we're trying to work through those options, but at least we know some of the numbers, that it's not as much as maybe we thought it was going to be, of hundreds of kids in each, hundreds of kids, throughout the district that are concerned with that at this point.
Was there any grade or segment that seemed larger than others? Like, was it a lot of primary? Was it a lot of high school? Was it pretty evenly distributed?
Not really. It was, I wouldn't say evenly, but it was a smattering of everywhere. So there really wasn't wow, it's really our primary parents that have that, or middle school or high
Okay.
school. It was kind of a smattering all throughout.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. So obviously, as we get some more direction, we're going to put some more information out, and obviously, as we get closer, we will get more detailed on the students that there's some medical reason to preclude them to come in and try to deal with those on individual situations. Obviously, what was brought up at a previous meeting is our special ed students, of how they would be impacted by this situation. Again, those would be dealt with on individual situations, on what's working with those students and trying to see what is best for those students, because sometimes one situation would work really well for this particular student and one not. But again, that's an IEP type of decision based on an individual case. I wish I had very concrete things I could say to you on plans for next year, but know that the administration and I, we're all working together on trying to plan for all different scenarios, and also waiting for that guidance from the state to at least give us some parameters. Okay. That's all I have to say.
And I've been talking to mute. My apologies. Thank you. I was recommending that since we've come to an hour so far, a little bit beyond that, that we take 4 or 5 minutes and excuse ourselves for just a moment and get back together in 4 or 5 minutes to continue on with our review of agenda items. Is that agreeable? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, everyone, mute your line and also turn off your camera, and we'll see you back here in about 4 or 5 minutes when you're ready to go again. Kevin Price, what kind of aircraft is that on the shelf behind you? You're muted.
It's a two-seat F-16 variant, Dutch model. I flew with the Dutch Air Force for 3 years, so that's one they gave me as I walked out the door.
Nice.
Wow.
Not everybody gets an aircraft, you know, as a retirement or a departure gift. Well, unless you're in Saudi Arabia, maybe.
The gift I value most, though, is they gave me an F-16 tire because long story short, in the U.S. Air Force, you can't do touch and goes where you land and touch down. But in the Dutch Air Force, you can. So I used to just literally burn the tires up. So they, when I was done, the maintenance guys gave me one, and they put, "This is your last one." It's stenciled on the tire.
That's what you get.
I got it hanging up in my garage. So
I say, how big is it? How big is it?
I don't know. It's probably that big. I don't know. It's heavy.
Not
Yeah.
something you hide in your suitcase, that's for sure.
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. Next time I'll have that one. In fact, next one I'll have it there. I'll have it as my backdrop for the next board meeting.
Oh, okay. All right, I think we're all back. All right, continuing on now. For our the agenda review is a new topic as of last month. This item is to provide greater discussion of agenda items before these items are brought forward for a motion and a second. Some districts in Ohio do this in a separate special meeting, which is often called a work session, though literally all non-regular meetings are special meetings. Work sessions are not required by law in Ohio. Ohio law requires that school boards conduct a regular meeting at least once every 2 months. Not very workable for us, but. So this agenda item for review of the rest of the agenda is for the benefit of not just board members to have additional discussion time, but for the community to better understand the background of decisions and the workings of it. So looking, I'm going to skip over the treasurer's report because he'll give us good information on that. And correspondence, we'll go to item number 8 under the superintendent's report. The A, B, and C sections correspond to certified staff. A is central office staff, and C is support staff. So under 8A, the certified and licensed, we have a resignation from Amanda Hoff, personal choice, and she's wishing the district and her coworkers well in that regard. Any questions about Amanda? She was fourth grade teacher, is that right, Dr. Kozad? Okay.
Correct. Yeah, this is one of those, good for her, but just, that's the situation we're in. This is unfortunately what's happening a little bit is that good people are leaving just because of the uncertainty here. So,
Sure.
Good luck to her. She's a fantastic individual, fantastic teacher, and then, good luck to her.
Yeah, she wrote a very touching resignation letter, and it's clear she's torn with her departure, and I'm sad to see that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The next one in that section is approval of athletic and music department volunteers. I won't go through the names, but there were 66 volunteers for athletics across a variety of sports, and a lot of certified staff included in that. And 15 volunteers for the music program, and that's specifically marching band, isn't it?
Yep. Marching band and guard. Yeah.
Oh, and guard. Okay.
So again, the volunteers here, normally we would have posted these supplementals in May, and we'd be filling these right now. Just with the uncertainty of what the fall is, we're taking a very conservative approach of approving people, but we're approving them as volunteers. They already have their paperwork in, so they can obviously work with students. We're approving as volunteers so they can continue to work with our students. And then once we have some more clarity on what next year is going to bring, we will then come back and assign them the specific percents of their positions.
And this gets them covered by our liability insurance by approving them as volunteers.
Yeah.
The board,
Oh, I see.
they're now covered for liability.
Okay. Well, then as are we.
Right.
Yeah. Anything else on the volunteers? Thank you. The recommending the approval of extended service days for Athletic Director Charlie Odell and Barbara Seiler and Andrew Solomon for marching band directors. Those days, 30 days for Charlie, 8 for Mrs. Seiler, and 14 for Mr. Solomon, are the same as last year, as I recall.
Yep.
So that is no different.
They're the same, and they're starting up things already. We're opening back up for sports. The governor has given the go-ahead for that. That was at the beginning of June. So, Charlie is intimately involved in making sure everybody's safe and organizing all of that. And then marching band will be starting up here in July. So, there's, again, looking under the same type of guys or same type of umbrella as sports and so forth. So we're starting to open up some things.
Now, students who participate in athletics or marching band, can they count that as a PE credit?
They get a PE waiver, yep.
Okay.
They have to do 2 out of 3 for the 1 year, yes. 2 out of 3 seasons of something.
Oh, okay. So if you're in marching band in the fall, then you want to be in track or something else for the spring.
Or IPE or something, yep.
Okay.
Concussion, yep.
Okay. All right. Any questions, comments on the extended service days? Well, you get an opportunity. It's not like this is your only opportunity. When it comes back around to the motion component, we can still have other discussion if you come up with ideas or questions that you want to ask when that comes around. 8B, central office staff, recommending the approval of the contract suspension for special education supervisor Tanya Wilson. And that's a reorganization of the special education department. Dr. Kozetter, do you want to comment further on that?
Sure, yes. Again, so this is a reorganization. So after much thought and consideration, we're reorganizing a special ed department in our district. Ms. Wilson will not be back as a special ed director effective July 31st of 2020. Todd Whalen, who's our current assistant assistant principal at the high school, is going to have some of his responsibilities as assistant principal shifted away from him. And then he's going to take on the special ed responsibilities. And then the building principals and the school psychologists are going to take a bigger role into this situation. And so and then another piece of this is our preschool, which is run by the Greene County ESC. The lead teacher position, we've got a lead teacher who teaches half a day and then is the quasi administrator. The other half, that half time is being eliminated. And we actually have a new part-time preschool supervisor, and her name is Tracy Womack. So we really think that this reorganization is going to provide us great personalized, even better personalized service down at the building level and the student level. So that's the reasons for the reorganization.
There was a discussion, the preview of that information to the special education parents last night, as I recall, and that was well received. The reorganization was well received.
Correct.
I think it's worth noting that Tanya's role was preschool. I know you kind of alluded to it, but it was preschool and special ed. So I heard some concerns from parents that Mr. Whalen will be still assistant principal of high school, sharing the role with the special ed, but that's sort of what Tanya had been doing for years anyway. Correct?
Yeah, Tanya was preschool supervisor and supervisor of special ed for the entire district. So that preschool piece is totally going away from that position.
So he won't
And
be
then
doing-
also, I'm sorry?
Mr. Whalen won't be doing preschool as well as high school and special ed, just special ed and high school.
Correct. And the building principals and psychologists are going to take a bigger role into the decision-making and participation in those pieces too. So Mr. Whalen is going to be more of district oversight, compliance, and so forth. Mr. Whalen has done a fantastic job at the high school. He has central office experience in a previous district out of state, and this was his first year at the high school. Was a principal at an alternative school that had a very high special ed population. So very a lot of experience with special ed students, and I think is going to do a nice job of again providing personalized service and building those relationships with our special ed parents.
All right. Any other questions, comments? All right, going on 8C support staff, resignation from bus driver Ray Jean. He's resigning for health reasons. And then we have a reduction in hours for a special needs assistant, Jan Tapia, but she had another assignment that was part of her responsibilities, and that assignment isn't necessary anymore, and so her time is being brought more in line with the other special needs assistants. Is there something I'm missing in that?
Nope, that's correct. So the other special needs assistants at high school have 6.5 hours, so this will bring her in line with that.
Okay.
Yep.
Questions, comments? Okay. And let's see, recommending approval of Deborah Bailey as a substitute teacher.
Bus driver.
Substitute bus driver, thank you. Oops. It rolled off the tongue too quickly, substitute bus driver. How are we, I know that we seem to always be in need of substitute bus drivers. How are we doing on the pool with that?
She's the only substitute bus driver we have. So even with our reduction in force with our bus drivers, those folks were reassigned as special needs assistants. So we really, Bev Wetzel, who is our transportation supervisor, she obviously is a sub, but we really don't have any subs. So even though we have reduced our force and our bus drivers the past few years, we still need substitute bus drivers.
Okay.
Yeah. So people have resigned, retired, left, and that's why it continues to get smaller and smaller.
How many bus routes are we running this next?
I think, don't quote me on this, I'm thinking like in the 26 range, 26 bus drivers, somewhere in that range.
Okay.
Yeah.
And bus driver has to have this commercial driver's license, don't they?
Correct. Yeah.
Anybody else?
Just a few years ago, we were at 30, 35 bus routes. So through our reductions, we've reduced, and correct me if I'm wrong, Kevin, I mean, right by 5, 7, 9 routes, somewhere in that range.
Right. At one time, we had 35. I don't know how many years ago that was, but I remember that.
Yeah. It was back when we were picking students up next door to the school.
Yep.
Right.
8D is the high school athletic security. And this specifically is for football games, isn't it?
Correct.
And with the city of Bellbrook.
Yep.
The football stadium is actually straddles the city and the township. It seems like it goes like right down the 50-yard line. Any questions about having security for the football games? This is a renewal of something we've had year after year after year.
Yep.
And then the school security agreement, similarly, we've had that. The focus then though is the buildings that are in the city limits. We have a separate agreement for Sugar Creek for like the middle school and the high school?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay. Other questions, comments? All right. And then 8F is a revision to school fees. There's a notation on the document that you've provided for us. It says that they're $6 less for K through 5 because of not needing specific resources for art and STEM in K through 5, but 50 cents more for grade 3 because of a reading workbook. So grade 3 is only reduced by $5.50. No other changes up here on the report. So, questions or comments? Okay. And then we have a donation from the Bellbrook Lions Club for our softball field, and that's wonderful.
Yeah, they
$26.
they continue to be very generous with the school district and the community as a whole. You know, appreciation to them for their donation to our school district. They just are a very great organization. They're very giving to us.
Yeah, I appreciate that very much. All right, so that's it for items that we'll be voting on. So go on.
Yeah, the other piece, I'm sorry to interrupt. The other piece is, this is on a hand carry new business, the MOU with Greene County Career Center for our biomed position.
Okay, where does that, I don't have that. Where does that show up in our
I believe that was emailed to you. Was that emailed to everybody? Should have been emailed to you.
Yeah.
Oh, well, shame on me.
Today. I mean, it was today.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And so, you know, so this agreement, we have other positions in the school district, family consumer science, that we contract with the Career Center for. So this is essentially the same document as that. It's just a couple pieces in here about the biomed specifically, but it's essentially the same contract that we've had with them for the family consumer science positions.
Okay.
And so, you know, again, I know we'll get to this later, but thank you to them. They've been great to work with. We already have a very good relationship with them. They approved this at their board meeting last night. So once this is approved tonight, then we can move forward with filling that position under this reorganization piece that we have for high school science.
Okay. All right. Any other questions or comments? All right, let's go on to the treasurer's report.
Okay, can I get a motion to approve the minutes from the regular meeting held May 21st?
So moved.
Mrs. Sloughman and second by Mrs. Long. Any questions or comments? All right, I was Mr. in every reference, Kevin, so that was great. Thanks.
Yes, that's an improvement for me.
All right, go ahead and call the roll, please.
All right, Mr. Carpenter,
Yes.
Mrs. France,
Yes.
Mrs. Long,
Yes.
Mr. Price,
Yes.
Mrs. Sloughman.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Can I get a motion to approve the treasurer's report for the month of May?
So moved.
Mrs. Franz,
Second.
Mrs. Sloughman.
Josh, I don't know if you're there, but this would be the time we could put the pie chart reports up if you want to do that. Well, there we go. Okay. Those of you that have the hard copy can see in the blue section the pie charts. So on the blue copy, it shows that with 1 month left in our fiscal year, because the fiscal year ends June 30th, and these reports are as of May 31st,
Okay.
that it looks like on the expenditure side, our salaries and wages are right at 78% of our budget, which is good. I always say 80, you start to get nervous if it's 80%. I've seen districts that are 85% of their budget on salaries and wages. That's usually a problem more with the rest of the budget being small than it is anything with salaries being high.
Right.
And then on the revenue side, real estate taxes are 66% of our budget at this time of revenue, not our expenditure budget, but 66% of our revenue. And with state and federal funding together is about 28% of our general fund, with state being about 27, federal being about 1% of the general fund. And also want to just note that the predictions that we make at the beginning of the year on revenue and expenditures for budgetary purposes can be amended as we go along throughout the year, but we're hitting them pretty well with 92% of the fiscal year elapsed. We have spent just about the right amount of money that we would expect out of each one of these areas, and receiving just about what we would expect. So we got kind of lucky this year on estimates. A couple of them were over on revenues, and the only ones that look bad are the ones that involve advances. The way the state requires us to do advances, when you advance from one fund to another, it appears as an expenditure in one fund and a receipt in the other. And if you have to make a lot of advances, it overinflates your expenditures and receipts because you have to keep including it that way. But anyway, that's really all I have, unless you have any questions on any of the reports.
Anyone? All right, go ahead and call the roll.
Okay. All right, Mrs. France,
Yes.
Mrs. Long,
Yes.
Mr. Price,
Yes.
Mrs. Sloughman,
Yes.
and Mr. Carpenter.
Yes.
Can I get a
Motion
motion to approve in advance of $1,000, which is a loan, so to speak, from the general fund to the lunchroom fund to eliminate a deficit at the end of May, and this will be made up by receipts that we will get from state and federal money for lunchroom in June.
Okay. You have a motion?
So moved.
Mrs. France?
Second.
Mrs. Sloughman?
Sure.
Any questions? Okay, go ahead and call the roll, please.
Okay. Mrs. Long,
Yes.
Mr. Price,
Yes.
Mrs. Sloughman,
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter,
Yes.
Mrs. France.
Yes.
Motion passes.
And then the last one, could I get a motion to approve an amendment of appropriations for the fiscal year 1920 by $575,739.48, and I will explain that after we get a motion on the table.
Okay.
So moved.
Mrs. Long?
Second.
Mrs. Sloughman?
Okay, these appropriation amendments are included in the blue section of your agenda, and we have about 6 of them. The small amounts are for federal grants that they continually change the allocations on as the year goes along. So we have to change our budget for each one of them. Then the 2 big ones are the bond retirement fund and the permanent improvement fund. Those are increased. I always increase them here at the end of the year because I don't like to budget revenue in those 2 funds until I'm sure I've got it. Because
Sure.
especially the permanent improvement fund involves a lot of rental income of the stadium and different donations and things. So that just is a revenue budget that we're putting into the budget now that we know that we're going to get more money than we thought in those 2 funds to help with permanent improvement and bond retirement payments. And it's a bookkeeping thing that the county auditor requires us to do. Once this is passed, I'm going to file it with Mr. Graham's office.
Okay. And then OneNet connectivity is that our intranet services?
Yes, that's actually a state grant. All the rest of them are federal. There at the bottom, it's a small grant that was instated probably 20 years ago to help us with original network connectivity when districts started to advance and do a lot more technology. So, yeah, OneNet network connectivity grant. I don't even know if OneNet is the correct name anymore, but it used to be OneNet.
Oh, okay.
But it is network connectivity.
All right, thank you. All right, any other questions? All right, let's call the roll.
Okay, Mr. Price,
Yes.
Mrs. Sloughman,
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter,
Yes.
Mrs. France,
Yes.
Mrs. Long.
Yes.
Motion passes. Okay, going on to the next item, which is correspondence. As we talked about on Monday, we got a number of letters about the kindergarten, all day, every day kindergarten scenario. And so that I think we've talked through all of those, but I know that each of those individuals got a response, either if they sent it to a board member or if they sent it to a superintendent. Each of those persons got a response. Other correspondence that people received. Anyone have anything that they want to mention?
I have a correspondence that I would like to read.
Okay.
This is, I was given permission to read portions of this, and it was written by a mother of 2 children in the district by the name of Megan Trickler. I appreciate your work and dedication to the school district and community that I love. I regret that the district is facing so much adversity at the same time, but there is an important issue that has been ignored for far too long. And with respect, I would like to bring it to light with hope that we as a community can make positive and long overdue change. The equal rights of people of color in our nation has easily become the most important issue in our nation this week. Huge protests are held in every U.S. city, in over 50 countries, and even right here in Bellbrook, making it perhaps the biggest civil rights movement in history. I hate that we are so short on financial resources right now, but there are many things that can be done at little or no cost. I am no expert, and there are likely many more suggestions that can be added, but I ask your consideration some of the following ideas for implementation in our district. There's 13 of them, so I'm going to read them. Number 1, a statement of support and commitment regarding the fight against racial injustice and inequality. Number 2, materials for staff, teachers, students, formats to learn more. 3, a presence on social media platforms offering numbers 1 and 2 above. 4, making sure content in numbers 1 and 2 above are emailed to all families, as well as readily available on the BSS website throughout the summer. 5, create an official school statement on diversity, equality, and inclusion that is a permanent part of the school mission statement and always available on the school website. 6, making sure there are students of color represented in photos on our website, on social media posts, and in the paper material sent out to school families and to voters. Number 7, offer counseling services to students who feel affected by what's going on. If the school district cannot afford this, then direct them to phone numbers or websites that offer these services. Number 8, offer programming remotely over the summer and also during the school year that allows students to think critically about racial disparity, racial violence, social justice, and develop a strong cultural competence. Number 9, find ways these issues in number 8 above can be integrated across the curriculum in all subjects in all classrooms, not just a unit in social studies or in the guidance counselor's office. Number 10, Look for a measure of accountability where efforts of inclusion can be found in each classroom, team sport, club, student government, etc. Number 11, offer a student club or organization where students of color and allies can feel included and part of our community. 12, offer a student organization or club that focuses on civil rights related topics, activities, and or integrate them into existing clubs that focus on our community. There's actually 16, I'm gonna go. 13, if not already doing so, supply comprehensive diversity training to all staff and teachers. 14, critically consider current civil rights, racial injustice, diversity, inclusivity materials offered to students or taught to students and review them through a current lens. Look for new material coming out right now that would be appropriate. 15, appoint someone within the district to have an additional role as a diversity inclusion officer. 16, make a commitment to learning how to attract and retain teachers and staff of color. Make this a priority. There are multiple resources out there to help in this effort. Our students of color do not have role models in this district that look like them. Our white students need these examples as well. This week is certainly a moment in time that future students will someday study. I want BSS to be on the right side of history and also make sure our community has the tools it needs right now supported and to learn to think and act as thoughtful citizens. Please don't delay. Timing is of the utmost importance.
Thank you very much. I think that letter came to all of the board members, and I think that's her letter is very well written. It's very very certainly to the point for what's happening in the world around us and internally as well, within our own community. I'm glad to see that some of those things that she suggested are starting to happen, but certainly are things that that we can continue on. And I know that Dr. Kozat is very intent on seeing some of these things through in the upcoming year. So that's I appreciated her communication to us, and both its timeliness and content, and her fervent desire for it to be right for us, to encourage us. So, any other questions or comments on the letter for right now? I know that we've responded to her to say thank you for that as well.
I believe the letter that went out really, to a great degree, at least addressed some of the key elements that she'd brought up in her letter. Notably, like I said, and you were talking about potentially having a committee set up next year. Perhaps Meg and some of those other folks that are passionate about this in particular would like to participate in that. So at least there will be opportunities, for addressing the concerns. But I think it would be really important to get community involvement with concrete, suggestions, recommendations that would feed into this. So anyway, I hope that the letter that went out addressed, the bulk of her concerns, but it's pretty extensive what she brought up, and I think that's a work for a committee like forever, to work on and to continue to refine those concerns. So hopefully, she or others will participate in that committee and address the concerns that are brought up.
I know Dr. Kozat has started to identify individuals who would be good candidates for that. I don't know if you've asked anybody yet, but I know that you have a short list that you've prepared so far. So.
Yep, we're definitely starting on that right now, and again, we take those things very seriously, and we're going to move forward and have some good discussion on those things and take action on some of those things. But forming the committee, I think, is the biggest first step in that whole thing of trying to gather input and insight into what's best for our community.
I will say I reached out to Kevin Kelly. He is the head over the Dayton International Peace Museum, and it's a wonderful resource for us. Read a really good statement that I asked permission to read here, but it doesn't fit right now. But I tell our community members, if you're not sure what to do or you want to do something, reach out to them, the Dayton International Peace Museum. And Kevin and I have actually, well, with the Peace Museum, have collaborated, not with Kevin, but with the Peace Museum. He and I have collaborated in the past to do some things. And I would like to see some of that happen here and maybe even over the summer. Something I might do on my own time, but to get students now involved in some things, to feel safe and to communicate with each other and just be in touch, to know we're in this together and we're here to listen.
I think as well, Doug, that I think a focus of inclusion is not exclusive to race. There are other elements of inclusion, include orientations or those with special needs or whatever. So it's not uniquely a race-based.
Religion, culture, definitely.
Yeah.
And those things are going to be included in the committee, definitely.
Yeah. Anything else on that letter? Okay. I also got one that was from a parent. This was titled Levy Considerations. I've got portions of it that I want to read, as well as my response to him. He starts off and says, "I want to thank you for being board members, and I know you did not choose this job to be belittled and vilified. That being said, I have voted no, and I will continue to vote no until we see some concession on teacher and faculty pay. It feels as though you are picking on things that affect the families and nothing that asks the teachers and administrators to give some when it comes to pay and benefits. I truly believe that if you discussed pay cuts, it would show that the cuts are not directed just at families. Everyone needs to feel the pain. I think a levy can be passed, but until teacher and faculty pay is addressed, you will not be able to pass the levy. If we lose some teachers from these cuts, then I believe you can say, this is what you, the voter, asked for, and here is the result of that request. I appreciate you hearing my point of view. We all need to be willing to have some pain as we move forward, as we address these tough economic times. And thank you for taking the time to read this email." And then he signed off on it. And I responded, and I said, "Thanks for your email, and you are correct. Our circumstances aren't exactly what we hoped for when serving on the board. I want to address your concern that faculty and staff aren't feeling any of the cuts. Perhaps we haven't done as good a job of communicating their part in reducing our costs. Number one, our teachers, staff, and administration have all agreed to a pay freeze for the 2021 school year. There is no intention of making it up in future years. That is essentially a savings of $700,000 for every year in the future. Number two, for the current school year, our employees have agreed to pay a larger portion of their healthcare expenses, and that follows through to next year as well. After that, healthcare benefits will be negotiated in the next contract. Number three, any incentives for retirement have ceased. Number four, most recently, our staff performing supplemental duties agreed to forfeit their supplemental pay due in the spring. Number five, in the past 2 years, 33 paid positions have been cut, including 17 certified licensed staff members, teachers, and similar professionals. This translates to more work for the same pay for persons who continue to work at Bellbrook-Sugarcreek schools. Number six, our career pay scale is lower than all our peers for teachers in all categories except for one, which is bachelor's degree with 150 plus credit hours. And number seven, our career pay scale is lower than our peers in all other categories except for librarians. And librarians, though, are still lower than custodians and secretaries. And then for career pay scale information, please see our state audit information on page 17 of the presentation, and I passed along the link. I know that several people beat on this issue constantly, but making further drastic changes will encourage our, drastic cuts will encourage our teachers and staff to look elsewhere. We already have lost several. Good programs and high academic standards and achievement need good teachers to support them. Without good teachers, our schools can't provide the same high quality education our students and parents have come to expect. I'd be interested in your feedback, please. Is this information new to you and impacts your perspective? Or are you aware of all of this information and still feel like additional cuts from our staff are necessary? Thank you for taking the time to write. Feedback is always a gift, and I appreciate the time you have taken to provide it. Best regards to you and your children, Dave Carpenter. So,
Respond to him as well. I'm not going to read my response. It's consistent with what David said, outlining that basically the teachers have paid a price. There was a commitment to that prior to even that Mr. Bitler refers to current economic times. The decision was made for these teacher salary accommodations before the current economic crisis. So it's clear that the teachers have made sacrifices. The district is aware of that. And probably the one thing I covered, David, that you didn't was, or maybe you did, I can't recall, but our teachers are paid commensurate with their education, their experience, and in line with their peers in this region. And notably, during the Auditor States review, there was no recommendation for the cutting of our teacher salaries. In fact, they noted that actually they are paid in some cases less than people in the area for the same amount of experience. Right. So again, those that keep harping on cutting the salaries, they are not appreciating reality, and it's just the way it is. So they are paid, again, commensurate with their education, experience, and with their peers in the region. So, and they already have, cuts have been made. And so, again, it's cutting is not the solution, because that little thing we talked about earlier called inflation. And it's just, it's not the solution.
Any other comments? Any other correspondence? This was a big month for correspondence, that's for sure. Okay. Open communication period is next. We did not have anyone sign up for communication this evening. So I will turn it over to Dr. Kozad for the superintendent's report.
All right, thank you, David. New business, certified staff employment resignation, leave of absence, supplemental duty. Recommended acceptance of resignation from teacher Amanda Hope immediately.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Mrs. France?
Second.
Mrs. Long? We talked about it a little bit earlier. Are there any additional questions or comments? Okay, call the roll, please.
Mrs. Sloughman,
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter,
Yes.
Mrs. France,
Yes.
Mrs. Long,
Yes.
Mr. Price.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Recommend approval of athletic and music department volunteers for the 2020-21 school year.
Motion.
So moved.
Mrs. Long?
Second.
Mrs. Sloughman? Any questions, comments? Please call the roll.
Mr. Carpenter,
Yes.
Mrs. France,
Yes.
Mrs. Long,
Yes.
Mr. Price,
Yes.
Mrs. Sloughman.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Recommend approval of the following licensed staff extended service days for the 2021 school year. Charlie Odell, athletic director, 30 days. Barb Seiler, assistant band director, 8 days. Andy Solomon, band director, for 14 days.
We have a motion.
So moved.
So moved.
Mrs. Long, and second by Mrs. Sloughman. Any other questions or comments? All right, please call the roll.
Mrs. France,
Yes.
Mrs. Long,
Yes.
Mr. Price,
Yes.
Mrs. Sloughman,
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter.
Yes. Motion passes.
B, central office staff employment resignation, leave of absence. Recommend approval of contract suspension for special education supervisor Tanya Ray Wilson, effective July 31st, 2020. And I'll read the board resolution. Whereas the Board of Education has adopted a policy for reduction in force of administrator positions that allows for the suspension of administrator contracts for financial reasons and/or reorganization of administrative functions. Whereas the district's financial situation has made it necessary to reduce expenditures in the general fund for the foreseeable future. And whereas the Board of Education determined to reorganize certain administrative functions, now therefore be resolved that the superintendent is authorized and directed to implement an administrative reduction in force and shall give general notice to the following employees of a suspension of their administrative contracts. Tanya Ray Wilson.
Have a motion?
So moved.
Mrs. France? I'll second it. Any comment, questions? All right, Mr. Lemming, please call the roll.
Mrs. Long,
Yes.
Mr. Price,
Yes.
Mrs. Sloughman,
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter,
Yes,
Mrs. France.
Yes.
motion passes.
C, support staff employment resignation leave of absence, recommend acceptance of resignation from bus driver Raymond Jean, effective October 12th, 2020.
Have a motion?
So moved.
Mrs. Long,
Second.
Mrs. Sloughman? Any questions or comments? All right, please call the roll.
Mr. Price,
Yes, and wishing him all the best with his challenges.
Yes,
Mrs. Sloughman,
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter,
yes,
Mrs. France,
Yes.
and Mrs. Long.
Yes.
motion passes.
Recommend approval for reduction in half-day pay to special needs assistant Jeanette Tapia from 7 to 6.5 hours, effective the 2021 school year.
Have a motion?
So moved.
Mrs. France,
My second.
Mrs. Long? Any questions, comments? All right, please call the roll.
Mrs. Sloughman,
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter,
Yes,
Mrs. France,
Yes.
Mrs. Long,
Yes.
and Mr. Price.
Yes.
motion passes.
Recommend approval of Deborah Bailey as substitute school bus driver for the 2021 school year.
So moved.
Second.
Mrs. Sloughman and Mrs. Long? Any other questions or comments? Okay, please call the roll.
Mr. Carpenter,
Yes,
Mrs. France,
Yes.
Mrs. Long,
Yes.
Mr. Price,
Yes.
Mrs. Sloughman.
Yes.
all right, motion passes, and hope this is the first of several more to have substitute bus drivers for us.
D, high school athletic security, recommend approval agreement with the city of Bellbrook to provide police security services for the fall 2020 athletic season. No increase over 1920 school year.
Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Mrs. France,
Second.
Mrs. Sloughman? Any questions or comments? All right, please call the roll.
Mrs. France,
Yes.
Mrs. Long,
Yes.
Mr. Price,
Yes.
Mrs. Sloughman,
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter.
Yes, motion passes.
F, school security agreement, recommend approval agreement with the city of Bellbrook to provide district-wide police security services for the 2021 school year. No increase over 1920 school year.
We have a motion.
So moved.
Mr. Price? and
Second.
Mrs. France. Any questions or comments?
Again, just kudos to the Bellbrook Police Department. They always do a fantastic job. You know,
Absolutely.
like I said, with Sugarcreek Township last month when we agreed, we had the agreement with them. They all just do a fantastic job. Appreciate their services and service to our community and to our students. So
Yes,
they're an asset to our community.
absolutely. Mr. Lemming, we call the roll.
All right. Mrs. Long,
Yes.
Mr. Price,
Yes.
Mrs. Sloughman,
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter,
Yes,
Mrs. France.
Yes.
motion passes.
F, revision of school fees for 2021 school year. Recommend approval of revision of student fees for the 2021 school year. This reflects the STEM and art reductions at Stephen Bell and BCI.
We have a motion.
So moved.
Mrs. Sloughman. I'll second it. Any questions or comments?
I'd rather pay the fees and get these back.
Yeah. You and all of us, I think. All right, Mr. Lanning, please call the roll.
Mr. Price,
Yes.
Mrs. Sloughman,
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter,
Yes.
Mrs. France,
Yes.
and Mrs. Long.
Yes.
Motion passes.
G, donation, recommend acceptance of the following donation with gratitude. Bellbrook Lions Club, 2,600 cash donation for softball field improvements.
So moved.
Mrs. France,
Second.
Mrs. Long. Any questions? Mr. Lanning, please call the roll.
Mrs. Sloughman,
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter,
Yes, thank you.
Mrs. France,
Yes.
Mrs. Long,
Yes.
and Mr. Price.
Yes.
Motion passes.
And so H is the hand carry memorandum of understanding with the Greene County Career Center. So recommend approval of memorandum of understanding between the Bellbrook-Sugarcreek Board of Education, the Greene County Vocational School District for implementation of career technical biomedical science program at Bellbrook High School effective with the 2021 school year. And this is due to the reorganization of our science department due to the phase 4 reductions because of the levy failures.
So moved.
Mrs. France,
Second.
Mrs. Long. Any further questions? All right, Mr. Lanning, please call the roll.
Mr. Carpenter,
Yes.
Mrs. France,
Yes.
Mrs. Long,
Yes.
Mr. Price,
Yes.
and Mrs. Sloughman.
Yes.
Motion passes.
So items of information discussion. Revision to board policy, first read for number board policy 2431, interscholastic athletics. And actually this is second month in a row that we've revised this because the OHSAA, which is the athletic organization for the state of Ohio that we are a member of, they continue to provide recommendations and guidance on eligibility for the fall season. And so we're really falling in line with what they are recommending just because so that we have a level playing field with all the other schools, not only around our community, but around the state. So really the only change is for the fall season of 2021 school year only, all students in grades 7 to 12 will be eligible. So there's really no eligibility requirements. You just have to be a student here for the fall season. And then once the winter season kicks in and so forth, we're back to normal eligibility requirements. So that's the first read. So that will come back next month. The other pieces are technical revisions, only to change district compliance officer for discrimination cases, 504s, and so forth. So those all have been changed to Jeanette Sigmund is now that compliance officer. So we have a male and female. Joshua Bowles is the male compliance officer, and Jeanette Sigmund is the female compliance officer for those. For harassment, discrimination, 504s, and everything else. Appeals, yep. So that just is since it's a technical revision, it just is kind of for informational purposes. We just changed that person in there. Any questions about any of that?
No.
Nope, sounds good.
And then last year, 2020 district retirees, we always honor our district retirees at our end of the year board meetings. So I'll just quickly say a huge thank you to the staff members. They have spent countless hours and years with the school district. And we really appreciate their dedication to not only the students, but to the community. And we really wish them good luck in their retirement. So Sandy Bolton, is one of the retirees, a total of 30 years teaching, 20 in Bellbrook. She taught first grade, seventh grade social studies, and eighth grade math and social studies. So all the way from first grade to middle school. Cheryl Ellinger has taught a total of 40 years, 38 have been Bellbrook, taught middle school and elementary, special ed, and also fourth grade. Michelle Fogarty, 26 years in education, 19 years at the high school, and has taught high school art the entire time. Jenny Kaffenberger, 25 years as a school nurse. She was 5 years as for preschool to 12, so she was our only school nurse there for a while. 7 years 4 to 12, 10 years grade 6 to 12, and 2 years just 9 to 12. So again, we have really increased our healthcare and our nursing positions throughout the district. Just as the needs of our kids continue to evolve and change, we have responded to that.
She was a childbirth coach for Mary Ellen and I when our first was born, and he's now 31.
Okay, all right.
No, 33, sorry. Yeah.
Oops.
Chris LaSalvia, 34 years in education, 20 years in Bellbrook, has taught special education, 5th grade, and then reading intervention. And Susan Peters, 37 years in education, 30 years at Bellbrook, and taught 5th grade for 29 years, and then a 7th and 8th grade teacher this past year. So just to give you a little brief overview of them, and we're going to have some certificates for them, and Mr. Carpenter, I believe, is going to hand deliver those to them. So
Yes. I'll be happy to do that. If anybody wants to go with me for any one of those, I'd be happy to have them go along. We can only take one, but anybody who wants to go with me, that'd be great. So let me know afterward.
and that's all I have for that part.
All right, very good. Any other comments by board members? Anything else? All right, do we have a motion for adjournment then?
So moved.
Mrs. Long was first to that, and I'm not sure who else was after. Mrs. France. All right, is there any discussion on adjournment?
No.
Probably not. All right, Mr. Haliming, please call the roll.
Mrs. France,
Yes.
Mrs. Long,
Yes.
Mr. Price,
Yes.
Mrs. Sloughman,
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter.
Regretfully, yes. All right, thank you all very much. Thank you for those of you who are watching us live. Thanks for hanging in there with us. And you all have a good rest of your